Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Cambridge Union Society. It is a pleasure to have you this Friday evening. My name is Christopher Lord. I'm the Equalities Officer here at the Union, and it is a pleasure to be able to welcome Leanne Mohamad. Leanne is a British-Palestinian activist and community organiser who stood against Wes Streeting in the 2024 general election, coming within 500 votes of winning the Ilford North seat for Parliament. Please give a warm welcome to our guest tonight, Leanne.
Thank you very much, Christopher, and thank you to everyone here today. It's an honour to stand before you in this historic place where, for over 2 centuries, voices have risen to challenge ideas, shape debate, and inspire change. And the walls of this union have echoed with the words of world leaders, activists, and revolutionaries, voices that dare to question the status quo. And today I really hope to add mine to that tradition. I stand before you as a young British Palestinian Muslim woman who made the decision to step into the world of politics. Not because it was easy, nor because the path was laid out for me, but because silence was never an option. When who you are and your identity is constantly debated by others, but very rarely are you heard, when your existence is political before you've even spoken, you learn quickly that if you don't tell your own story, someone else will tell it for you. And so I want to share a few words tonight about my story and why I believe that, although not atypical to the stories of many dispersed Palestinians around the world, why I believe that we are at a profound turning point, that Gaza has taught us all the meaning of what it means to live. 16 months ago, I believed the world was changed forever. A genocide began, a horrid, relentless, painful, silent, inconvenient genocide. Gaza has been a nightmare for all of us, and it represents all that is distasteful about the so-called rules-based order. It is a graveyard, not just for children, but a graveyard of an order, a liberal world order that has run its course. And Gaza is the culmination of the excesses of this order. In fact, it is its logical outcome. And this American-led order was created on the embers of colonialism, exploitation, and slavery. And this cruel, inhumane, genocidal outcome is no more than the last death pains of an order lost in its own hubris. Now, the world in which we live in is not an equal one, and we can all see it if we care to look. A genocide was taking place, yet the great and the good of the Western world remained silent. Actually, they were not silent. They gave the most horrific weapons of war to prosecute their crimes, but then talked of opening up humanitarian corridors or lightly reprimanded Netanyahu as if he was a wayward teenager. They were aiding and abetting a genocide but continued to claim the moral high ground because their charade of a system depends on a liberal facade. If you talk as if you care, then how can you be involved in genocide? Now, for us Palestinians, this is the last stage of European settler colonialism. Even before these past grinding 16 months, Gaza was an open-air prison, and the Israelis, in their perversity, would routinely mow the lawn to maintain their occupation, controlling how many calories each Palestinian in Gaza would be allowed to consume a day, lest a full stomach would increase their appetite for resistance. Gaza was a concentration camp. These past 16 months have just accelerated the age-old colonial quest to expunge the land of its rightful inhabitants. The Labour Party is sadly the greatest culprit here, because they could have stopped this. In opposition, they colluded with Sunak and Biden. Keir Starmer was clear that the siege on Gaza was an acceptable form of defence, and this was echoed by Lisa Nandy, by David Lammy, by Wes Streeting and Emily Thornberry. Now, in government, they not only helped the Israelis with reconnaissance missions, gave Israel access to its base in Cyprus, where it supplies the war machine, but also acts to give them diplomatic cover. Starmer refuses to call this mass killing a genocide, and just this past week agreed with the repulsive leader of the opposition, Kemi Badenoch, that Britain should not accept beleaguered refugees from Gaza. We all witnessed 470 days of televised murder. Yet the screams, the tears, the images of maimed children, weeping mothers, helpless fathers, traumatized youth have not moved Western politicians as they congratulate themselves on a job well done. Both Keir Starmer and David Lammy have shown us they care more for Israeli propaganda than the humanity of Palestinians. For Starmer, only Israeli mothers feel pain. He talks of Israelis being massacred and brutally murdered, Yet Palestinians had merely lost their lives, and such is the disdain they feel for the lives of an inconvenient people. Now, in the past, we Palestinians believed that if there was access to the internet and digital media in 1948, like today, Palestinians could live stream the Nakba in real time, and the international community would have intervened to prevent it. That my grandparents would not be refugees, they would still be living in their homes in Palestine. But how naive we were, because it's never been about a lack of evidence. It's about the very refusal to see us Palestinians as human beings. I am the granddaughter of 1948 Nakba survivors, who among 750,000 other Palestinians were forcibly expelled by Zionist militias, ending up as refugees in Lebanon. And like so many others, they thought it would be only a matter of a few days, maybe weeks, at most months until their return. But they never returned, and they were permanently forced out of their homes and homeland. My grandparents were both born in Palestine before the Nakba, yet they were of the first to be uprooted from their land. My grandfather died when I was very young. He lived a life of struggle, a man torn apart by the brutality of occupation, whose heart remained in Palestine but was never able to return. And my grandmother continues to live in that same refugee camp. The Nakba was not just a one-off event of expulsion, but an ongoing process that you have all been witnessing live and televised. For us Palestinians, there is no P in PTSD, and the family trauma that we have endured for decades is never-ending. Because we grew up waking up every day to news of our people humiliated, arrested, beaten, shot, and killed. Our parents grew up with that, and so did our grandparents. I grew up knowing of the struggles of my grandparents and the dislocation that comes with occupations and land dispossession. My childhood was happy, but morose at the same time. And when I was young, the horrible episodes in Jerusalem and the West Bank were fresh memory all around me. And I saw with horror the continued settlement activities and the horrendous assaults on Gaza, which they euphemistically called mowing the lawn. This all had an impact on my young mind, as I think it did for all Palestinians and indeed young Muslims that I grew up with. It's an unsettling feeling, but it burns a desire to seek justice within you. And I think it's this residual anger that gave me a feeling that I could never just live a life without calling for justice. Now let me tell you the story of how my activism journey actually began. Some of you may recognize me as the girl who spoke out and was silenced, or the girl who was censored for hoping for freedom. When I was 15 years old, I was called an ISIS girl for winning a speakers competition where I raised the issue of Palestine. And my English teacher at Wanstead High School in Redbridge nominated me to take part in the Jack Petchey Speak Out Challenge, the largest speaking competition for young people in the world. And I delivered a speech titled Birds, Not Bombs, and it won first place with rapturous applause from my audience. And my basic message was, Palestinians, my people, were human beings, and their plight was a stain on humanity. After winning the competition, I was extremely proud of my achievement. The video went viral. Embarrassingly, you can still see it online. But that's when the hate started. At first, it was a trickle, then a barrage. Online trolls bombarded my school's Twitter account, which had to be shut down. Then videos were made about me, labeling me a good little Miss ISIS girl. And I was subjected to an avalanche of online abusive comments and videos referring to me as a 15-year-old suicide bomber, an ISIS recruiter who needs to be burnt alive, an evil, anti-Semitic KKK Nazi schoolgirl who needs to be jailed permanently. And believe me, this was just the tip of the iceberg, just for speaking about Palestine. The police were called, and they could only advise to shut down my Twitter, to effectively be quiet, and this would all go away. But I refused to be silent. It was a confusing time, but a formative one for me, and the pain taught me one thing: never succumb to their intimidation. Silence is defeat. It's a form of inactive participation in a crime. You become an accessory in a settler colonialism that wants you to trade lives for an inconsequential life. And so I stood my ground, and then the support started pouring in. The hashtag #LetLeanneSpeak went viral, and I received overwhelming support from so many people that I didn't even know. With pain comes learning, and with the support of my family and my friends, I learned a valuable lesson about resistance, about determination. See, with pain comes resilience, and that was the lesson I learned from my grandparents. And resilience is what the people of Gaza today are teaching us all. You don't hear of people that give up on faith and family when they face this horrendous onslaught. In fact, what you see are upright people that are teaching us how to live. Not live lives of inconsequence, but to live lives that matter. Lives that will make us feel that at the end of our time, we tried to make a change. And even if we didn't achieve this change within our lifetimes, we made something of our lives. Now, when the slaughter of the people of Gaza started over a year ago, I vowed to myself that life would never be the same. We cannot and will not stand by whilst bombs drop on innocents. Bombs that were made here by munitions companies licensed by our British government. And I realised that to stop this genocide, we needed to make the politicians listen. And so when I announced that I was selected by my community to stand as an independent candidate for my home, Ilford North, I did so out of a deep sense of responsibility. For some time, I felt our political class was unresponsive to the needs of ordinary people. And you see, women like me do not stand for election. We are meant to be seen and not heard by a complacent political class that cares little for our lives, worries, and communities. Until now, a sewn-up electoral system has ensured that only one of two parties could have a realistic chance of winning. These parties offer little of value. They contain many vacuous people, careerists, unintelligent, and unintelligible. But why did I decide to stand? In a word, Gaza. Gaza was the reason why me, why you, and why so many good people across the country and across the world decided that enough was enough. Gaza symbolises something greater. It brought us out of our slumber and made us realise that this political system is broken. The two-party system is rigged against us. It forces us to choose the lesser of two evils until we cannot see anything but evil. And that's what the Labour and Conservative parties, Democrats and Republicans are today, two sides of the same rusty coin. But my generation has moved beyond the two-party duopoly that restricts the political appetites of ordinary people. We've seen through the corporate media that looks to construct a charade of difference, a mirage of freedom, only to stifle any attempt to speak truth to power. We young people especially have seen through all of this. Because the two-party system has failed us all. It has failed our elderly, our students, our mothers, our fathers, our families, our communities, our public services, our healthcare, our politics, and our institutions. Everything these two parties touch is corrupted. And so we have to break this duopoly, this politics of old, a stale, selfish, neoliberal nightmare. And it reduces these two-party leaders into clones of themselves. But I am not going to shy away from what brought me into politics. The injustices that we see abroad directly reflect the callousness with which governments, red and blue, treat people at home. I am a British-Palestinian who was raised in Ilford North, and my community of Ilford North was and still is suffering, and I've witnessed this firsthand working as a food bank volunteer and a local youth worker. Many working people, pensioners, and families are struggling, all while energy companies are still making record profits. I care deeply for the welfare of all my friends and neighbours in Ilford North, a place I spent all of my life and one that welcomed my parents as their home. And I take great pride in living in a multicultural Britain that cherishes diversity and embodies the essence of tolerance. I grew up in a family that worked tirelessly to establish a home in this country. My parents worked hard, but too faced the challenges of a flawed housing system. But it was my parents who taught me the value of service. They taught me the value of solidarity and standing up for what's right, even when it's unpopular. They gave me my courage. I'm no career politician, and my ambition is that we rise and fight together against the continued neglect of our communities. And so we knew that we had to flip the status quo. And so my campaign's pledges came directly from Ilford North's demands, not trickled down from an industry-funded think tank or swayed by lobby donations. My community was tired of the self-serving politicians. We were tired of the flip-flop between Conservatives and Labour, and nothing was getting better. And that's why so many people started turning to an independent alternative like myself, who'll put the interest of our community first. The reality is, these parties don't serve local constituents, and I knew that it would be a two-horse race between me and Labour. But when I said this, people didn't believe me. But my volunteers and I were having thousands of conversations on the doorstep, and we were gathering lots of data. I knew that to create a strong campaign, we needed to go to the doorstep and listen. I wanted to create a movement that grew from the concerns of my neighbours and the issues that they faced on a day-to-day basis. and how we together can hold those responsible and to affect change. And that is why I ran a positive campaign. And we campaigned on various community concerns, including health, crime, education, youth services, the cost of living crisis, and foreign policy. And I felt and heard consistently the message that politics was broken, the two-party system did not deliver, that representatives were aloof, and that there was a deep sense of betrayal. I knew then what election data points to now. Labour would not win this on a wave of popular enthusiasm, but rather because of a deep resentment towards the Conservatives. And so yes, I stood as an independent without a party machine. But we gathered a ready, inspiring base of volunteers who were willing to come out because they believed in a cause greater than any individual. I remember recruiting people to my campaign on the doorstep, and this was the power of our movement. This campaign was me, an unknown, up against a very public-facing sitting MP, Wes Streeting. We knew it was a challenge, but it didn't sway us. It made us fight that much harder. And every single doorstep conversation went from who to yes, and that made us even more determined to talk to literally everyone. And so I want people here to know that if you care about your community and you want to stand up to the injustice that we live through and see every day, you can do it, because it's the prerogative of this two-party system to deny us this hope. And of course, most of my vote base were former Labour voters, but I could also see a considerable number of Tory voters who were willing to switch to me, and that gave me a lot of hope. And our campaign in Ilford North has shown us that change is possible when you have hope, because on the 4th of July, I brought a senior member of Keir Starmer's cabinet, now Health Secretary Wes Streeting, to within 500 votes of defeat in Ilford North. He had all the money and party machinery behind him, but we built a people-powered movement from the ground up, and we brought people together. And I received 15,119 votes, and the Labour Party's Wes Streeting, 15,647. So if 263 voters had moved from Labour to me, I would have won the election. And so I want to tell communities across the country and across the world that what we did here was to run a lean campaign. It was focused, strategic, people-powered, and above all, it had heart. And essentially, we rethought how to campaign, and it's the campaign I will forever be proud of. It was grassroots, it was grounded in the community, and I had an incredible campaign team and a wonderful campaign manager who made our efforts exceptionally professional and well-organised. And we had the most wonderful and selfless volunteers join us day in and day out from near and far. And this dedication is rare in a country where the political class looks down upon the efforts of civic engagement. And so while the political establishment seeks to divide us, we've shown that elections can be fought on the basis of hope and not fear. And the lesson that we taught them during this last general election is that good people will stand up to this corrupt political class. People told me that when I stood for Gaza that I was a dreamer, that I was wasting my time and energy. Yet I came within 500 votes, 1.1% of defeating a senior government minister. And so if you believe in yourself, you can make change. It has been described as a seismic result for someone my age running an insurgent campaign that nearly brought down a leading member of the Labour Party and Health Secretary. Yet I was not surprised, because for weeks my team and I had knocked on doors and engaged with everyone in every ward. But no doubt many people were surprised by the result. They didn't think I had a chance at all, assuming that I was merely undermining Labour by taking a few thousand votes, and some even predicted that I would lose my deposit. However, from the beginning we made it clear that we were in this race to win, and the results proved us right. It was incredibly close. People didn't believe an independent could win, and they saw me as just a young Muslim woman in a hijab, unlikely to challenge a Labour cabinet member like Wes Streeting. So their surprise was palpable, but our campaign demonstrated the true power of the people, and we came together to send a message. And on the 4th of July, we held the two parties to account. The power of us together has sent a message that cannot be ignored. And so we will never be silent, and we will continue to rise up against this injustice. Gaza did play a central role in my campaign, and I will not shy away from this, because Gaza is changing an entire generation for the good. We are freeing ourselves from a system that has polluted our air, our politics, our minds, and our souls. Young people today have a greater cause, and Gaza has ignited a passion within us all that will be hard to extinguish. As a British-Palestinian, I felt acutely how the then Tory government and the Labour opposition had aided and abetted this horrible onslaught on a defenceless people. Wes Streeting, like Keir Starmer, obstructed calls for a ceasefire in November 2023, and it was clear to me The callousness with which they acted abroad reflected the callousness with which they dealt with people at home. And the most recent rejection of the two-child benefits cap is just one example of how this Labour government has abdicated its responsibilities to the least fortunate. Since the election, Wes Streeting has claimed that his loss of more than 20% of the vote was due to a divisive campaign. This, in my opinion, downplays the strength of feeling in his own constituency and the 15,000 plus voters who are ready to make political history. It also reflects an inability to observe the intensity of feeling in Ilford. We gathered people of all faiths, colours and ethnicities under a shared banner of humanity. And so I believe this independent movement will only grow stronger. This two-party nightmare has to end. And the reality is we've been disconnected from what real power is. Real power is the people and not the parties. So I am hopeful, because I met my wonderful friends and neighbours of Ilford North and sat in their front rooms discussing their joys and worries. We have to resist a race to the bottom, where politicians scapegoat the weak to win marginal results. And so we showed the political class they are vulnerable to the people, and we have to continue this people-powered political movement. So don't lose hope, and don't accept the status quo. Instead, make this past year, however painful, a moment in our lives where we vow to change the world and to wipe away this facade of a political establishment. We must continue to hold the structures, the institutions, the businesses, and the politicians to account. We remain far from justice. Today, despite this current ceasefire, Palestine is not yet free, and thousands were not killed just for a return to the status quo. The status quo is shattered, and there is no returning to normal, for what was normal allowed these atrocities to happen. The ceasefire does not end colonial violence. It does not end oppression. It is not a solution. Israel has dropped more than 85,000 tons of bombs in 1 year. That is equivalent to almost 6 bombs dropped on Hiroshima. So what remains now is an urgent demand for justice and accountability of all those who've enabled and perpetuated this genocide. Over these past few weeks, we've witnessed thousands of Palestinians returning on foot to their land in northern Gaza, fully aware that their homes have been reduced to rubble. They return knowing that 90% of northern Gaza lies in ruins. 90%. For us Palestinians, return is more than just a physical act. It's a deeply rooted concept and an unshakable right. Palestinians in Gaza have endured 15 months of genocide in their struggle against ethnic cleansing. Yet they return, determined, even if all that awaits them is the wreckage of their past. But why? Why return to devastation? Because we Palestinians teach life, sir. Because this is the will of a people who refuse to be erased. We are a people who will never accept being displaced, whether to Egypt, Jordan, Albania, or wherever else the US and Israel conspire to exile us. Our existence is our defiance, and the Palestinian people have shown the world what it means to live with dignity. Israel can kill, destroy, and uproot, but it will never break the Palestinian spirit. It will never break our connection to our homeland. Israel will never win. So right now, Palestinians in Gaza are still gathering the shattered skulls and decomposed remains of their children from beneath the rubble, while some dream of building a resort on their mass graves. And at the same time, others gloat over a minority that refused to support the party that enabled this genocide. Last week, we witnessed a disturbing escalation when Trump called for the clean-out of Gaza, proposing Palestinians are forcibly displaced to Jordan and Egypt. And in a press conference held alongside wanted war criminal Netanyahu in Washington, he outlined plans for the US to own the Gaza Strip, envisioning it as the Riviera of the Middle East, which would be built on the corpses of hundreds and thousands of dead Palestinians, half of them children. This is an all-out assault on the Palestinian people. This is part of an explicit and concerted effort to destroy Palestinians as a national group. And it has come in the wake of a long history of atrocities that define the Palestinian people's experience of more than a century of settler colonialism on their homeland. But let's not forget, it was the Biden administration that was responsible for this genocide. They armed Israel, they gave it diplomatic cover, they undermined international law to protect it, and they financed its death machine. And the only difference with Trump is that he wants to accelerate it, and he's saying it out loud. So Trump didn't change US policy. He just simply took the mask off. These plans are not new. They echo plans that we know have been discussed by Israeli officials for many decades, because they've long expressed that Gaza will be smaller in size and thinner in population. The idea of depopulating Gaza, of making life so unbearable that its people have no choice but to leave, has been embedded in Israeli policy for decades. Ethnic cleansing was always the plan, and not just of Gaza, but also of the West Bank. So this is a war on all Palestinians, an entire people, an entire identity. But the Palestinians will resist, because living is resistance. Tents are resistance. Breathing is resistance, and this is what Trump fails to understand. Palestinians will remain steadfast on their land. Palestinians will return. Palestine is greater than Trump, Netanyahu, Biden, or all the delusions of colonizers and war criminals. And they will run out of ways to erase us. But we will never run out of ways to exist. Gaza is Palestine, and its people are rooted there. Gaza will rebuild, Gaza will flourish, and Gaza will rise. And the Palestinian people are not going anywhere. Now, none of us will ever be the same, nor should we be. And nothing will ever be the same, nor should it be. But what we have built here has to burn in our hearts and move us to action until we breathe our last breath. Gaza has been our best teacher. It has been our educator. It has taught us to love, to care, to feel, to be alert. And we cannot let this moment pass. I refuse to believe that Gaza is but rubble and death. Gaza is a symbol. Gaza is a teacher. Gaza is a turning point. Gaza is humanity, and Gaza is me. And we are all Gaza. Gaza has broken us all. Gaza has exposed us all. Gaza has revealed the stark realities of life. Gaza has taught the world the profound meaning of faith and resistance and awoken us all to our broken politics. We have to keep fighting injustice, not for Palestine's sake only, but for humanity, for human rights, against supremacy, against racism, and against imperialism. So let's not be silent to a system that wants to buy our complicity. Let's not be a generation that walked by whilst people suffered. And let's look beyond our immediate comfort and think about what we owe the people around us. And let Gaza be our teacher. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that wonderful and moving speech. I was initially going to begin by asking you to tell us about your background, but I feel like that's largely been covered. So I'll jump directly into the questions. So you were a mere I believe, 528 votes from victory in Ilford North. And I just wanted to ask, when you found out that vote tally, what did that feel like? And do you think it says something about where politics are, not only in Ilford North, but in the UK in general?
Definitely. I think when I first heard the result, I wasn't surprised because I always knew that it was going to be close. I always was fighting to win, and that's why I stepped into this. I always told people that we were in it to win it, that it was possible, and I tried to make people believe as much as possible. And I think, what that result demonstrated was many people had enough of Labour and the Tories, and people felt homeless politically. People didn't know who to vote for. People were looking for an independent alternative, and they wanted something fresh, something new, someone who was community-rooted, and I think in Ilford especially, that's what really resonated. The fact that I wasn't an independent who'd sprung out of nowhere, but I was rooted in my community. I grew up there, I was raised there, I went to school there. I was a food bank volunteer, local youth worker there, and it even resonated on the doorstep when I would be meeting people and speaking to people. But I actually am from here. I know this area, and I'm here with the best interest for my community. I'm not just a career politician who's just being sprung into this area, running for a random political party. And so I think, on the day, we really demonstrated the power of the independent movement that is only growing. And also, despite Ilford North not winning, we had 5 pro-Gaza independents elected, which is a huge success and a huge achievement. And I'm sure there will be many more. And I'm sure this independent movement will grow. This is certainly not the end.
Absolutely. And you mentioned just now and in the speech being a food bank worker and working in community organising. What lessons, I think, did you take from that prior work into running an election campaign? And how do you think those lessons have helped you altogether?
There were many lessons, and it taught me more about the community I live in, because you are disconnected from many people around you. Think about it. How often do you speak to your neighbours? How often do you have conversations with your communities? Everyone's always busy travelling, whether it's university, whether it's your jobs. people don't engage with people who they live with, their local community. This is something very important. And I feel like we haven't really mobilised enough in our communities. Not enough work has been done. So this election really gave me an opportunity to meet more people, to understand their struggles. And, if you want to represent your community, then you have to do that. That's the least that you should be doing. Unlike these career politicians who are nowhere to be seen. And this was something that a lot of people were telling me about Wes Streeting. They were telling me that he was completely absent, that he was nowhere to be seen. And people felt angry, rightfully so. And so that's why they wanted a change. They wanted their concerns to be heard. They wanted a voice. Ilford North essentially had no voice, and unfortunately we still don't. But give it 5 years and we'll see what happens.
And so you mentioned sort of university, and I think I'll take that as an opportunity to sort of move where we're talking about. Both in the UK and across the globe, a lot of universities have pushed back very heavily against student activism, whether it be sort of, legal injunctions here in Cambridge or stronger police responses over in the US. Why do you think this is? And do you have any specific words for sort of student protesters who are campaigning for Gaza and for Palestinians?
I think students have a lot of power, and I think, universities can see that, and that's essentially why they're trying to clap down on students, because not just here in the UK, but all around the world, the encampments have been so powerful. But more than that, student activism. I think students have demonstrated courage in ways we've never seen before. Because back in my time at university at King's College London, things were very different. And I think things have changed drastically because we young people have never seen a live stream genocide on our screens like this before. It's something completely new to us. We've always heard about all these genocides in history, but we've never seen one live streamed in front of our eyes. Everywhere we'd go, no matter where it's TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, every social media platform, it was always there. And so people felt really angry, rightfully so. Students knew they had a role to play in this, and I think students played it very well. Especially here in the UK, the encampments, especially Cambridge students' response with Suella Braverman, I think that was brilliant. And I think universities know, that they are complicit. Students are very aware of it. And the mobilisation is so important. It has to grow because our education cannot be at the expense of Palestinian human rights. Universities are deeply complicit. And we have been pushing for universities to divest for many years. But I think especially within this year, we've had so many successes up and down the country, and it's only going to get better. I think the more students join this movement, the better. So if you haven't joined the Cambridge Palestine Society and the Cambridge movement, I think now's the time to do so, because believe me, change is possible. And that's all it takes, by the way, people believing the power they have. Students have a lot of power. Ordinary people have so much power, and that's what these two parties don't want us to believe. That's what this government doesn't want us to believe. These universities. I think what we showed from this election is we as ordinary people, as ordinary students, have so much power, and we must never undermine it, but actually use it for good. Because you can make so much change. They can crack down on one student, but they can't crack down on all of you together. So the power is really in our numbers. And we shouldn't fear anything as well. That's another thing. They try to instill this fear within us, this weapon of intimidation. But in reality, if we come together, believe me, we can make so much change. And it's about time universities divest. There's been so many divestment campaigns that have been successful. And we'll keep going until every single university divests from Israeli companies.
And sort of talking about the idea of, community organising, people-powered movements, I sort of want to move back to the realm of electoral politics. I think there's been a lot of concern from people about the rise of reform in British politics and that sort of right-wing ideology taking hold amongst a lot of people. How do you think sort of grassroots community organising can be used to push back against movements like that, especially, movements that are centred around ensuring equal human rights for people in Palestine and across the world?
Yeah, I think there are so many people right now who don't know where to go because we can see the rise of reform. We can see many people just not knowing where to mobilise. But this independent movement has been very important, and essentially it's been very special because how many times in history have you had an MP who represents the community and not a party? And essentially, with this, it's almost like, I'll tell you from my experience, I actually was a Labour member, and I was a Labour member from when I was 17 years old. I don't know, but probably like many people here, I was inspired by Jeremy Corbyn. And I especially remember 2018 and the Labour conference then, which was absolutely rammed with Palestinian flags everywhere and solidarity and chants. And that made me think that, okay, I have a home in this Labour Party, that I want to join this Labour Party. This Labour Party represents me. It gives me hope, not only as a British-Palestinian, not only as a young person, but as someone who believes in basic human rights. And unfortunately, we don't have that at all. And so for me, I left the Labour Party and cancelled my membership actually in October 2023 when Keir Starmer appeared on LBC, I'm sure we all remember that interview, and said that Israel had the right to cut off food, fuel and electricity to over 2.2 million Palestinians in Gaza, half of them children. And I knew then there is no way that I can remain a Labour Party member. So from that day on, many people across the country felt homeless. They didn't know who to vote for. They were like, okay, we're not voting for Labour. Where do we go now? And my community, the first thing that they did, after pressuring Wes Streeting, the first thing to do was email your MP. Let's see what our MP thinks about this, right? But again, unfortunately, he obstructed calls for a ceasefire. He said it was not the right time. And based on that, my community mobilised. We weren't going to sit back and just let this happen. They knew that in Ilford North, we can actually win this seat. Because if we mobilise and get together as a community, then we can hold him accountable. And that's what people needed to do. It was about accountability at the time. That's why so many independents stood across the country. And this is the power of our movement. You know, as ordinary people, if we mobilise and come together as communities, there are many seats to be won across the country. Not just that, it's about holding these politicians accountable. Even if you can't win the seat, have you lobbied your MP? Have you emailed your MP? MPs are counting on us to literally just, let them do whatever they want. But no, we have to be there. We have to be in their inboxes. We have to be at these lobby days in Parliament. We have to be holding them accountable for everything, because at the end of the day, they're there to represent you and to voice your concerns. And so in Ilford North, we knew that we had to change the status quo.
Thank you for that. I'm going to turn to the audience if anybody has any questions for Leanne before I turn to some of the questions I have on paper. Just over there.
Hi, my name is Samia, and thank you so much for talking with us. This was actually going to be quite a long question because I have context. I am a like-minded, community-driven woman like you, studying classics here. In fact, I also grew up in Ilford North and was one of your voters during the election. But regrettably, I have to admit that I was one of the 528 who could have changed the outcome of the vote. I was one of the 528 that could have altered who we saw representing us. And indeed, it was a mistake I have since understood the gravity of. Since then, I've gone out of my way to study the history of political order and propaganda as part of my undergraduate study, which I've changed completely from my previous path. I've taken up the role representing my college in the divestment campaign with Cambridge Pressure Points for Palestine because of the election result in Ilford North. Because of your existence, I very much believe in your message, and I respect you wholeheartedly for your courage against the two-party vacuous government system that you speak of. Because I don't think that your defeat is the end of your journey, and I believe in the power of the people, and I believe the hope that I used to have for Labour has to be reignited elsewhere, I want to ask you personally, how can we defend the minds from mass-manufactured propaganda that wish to erase the identities that we live and breathe?
Stop looking for the mic. Firstly, thank you so much for your comment and for being so honest about the election. I think there are many people who are in the same shoes as you, who we tried to say that we were in this fight to win it, that it was possible. And many people have now realised it, which is good. And I do hope many of you realised during the election, but it is what it is. I'm happy that many lessons have come out of this. Many people have learnt that your vote is so important. Every single vote then was important. And I tried to clarify that and make it known that it was going to be tight. And I said it was going to be a two-horse race. But many people actually just didn't believe it. But going forward, I'm sure that we'll see some changes. I forgot the question.
It's like, how can we defend ourselves from mass manufactured propaganda that wish to erase our various identities and the power?
I think it's all about asserting our presence. They will do anything to erase us and to try and get rid of us, but it's about asserting our presence, about being in those rooms, speaking on those in those areas, being on those tables that essentially, you feel that you don't belong there. For me, till now, if you told me that I would be 23 years old and running against Wes Streeting in the general election, I wouldn't believe you. But there's times where you have to sacrifice a lot, and there's times where you think that why not me? Why not me? And if not me, then who? If not now, then when? Sometimes it's about your personal sacrifice that you take. So I think there's always this thing about, we're not good enough. We look very different to people in those positions. But I just think that we should never let that push us back. Again, I think it was very difficult for me personally, but if we stay in this mindset, then we won't end up anywhere. They don't want to see us in those positions. We have to overcome that. And I think that's the importance of community as well. So during the election, I noticed that a lot of my canvassers weren't actually from a Muslim background. And I questioned this a lot. And I've realised that our community weren't familiar with it. Our community didn't feel very comfortable doing it. And that's why it's important to train our communities now. And we've learned this from the election, that we owe so much to the people around us. We owe so much in training the people around us to be the best versions of themselves. And now, after my experience in the election, I feel such a duty to help people who want to go into politics, young Muslim women who are interested, so that they learn from my mistakes and do even better.
That's a wonderful answer. Do we have any more audience questions?
Going forward, do you believe the future is, at least for people with views similar to yours, is the future to go the independent route, or do you believe a sort of party with like-minded people has its pros as well?
Thank you for your question. I personally think that, we don't need a political party, and we've clearly demonstrated that in this general election. If you look at the parties in Ilford North, I came second, and by the way, in Ilford North, to understand the demographics, we had a huge base of Tory voters, 20,000 Conservative voters in the last election. So this was also a challenge here. But what we've shown is that I didn't even need to join any party. I stood as a complete independent, no party machine, just my community, and we came second. We came within 528 votes. It was possible. It has been achieved in many other areas. You've seen it with Shaukat Adam in Leicester. We've seen it with Mohammed Iqbal in Dewsbury and Batley. We've seen it in Birmingham Peribel with Ayub Khan. So many. Jeremy Corbyn, biggest example, in Islington North. So it's possible without a party. I think now what we really need to focus on is community mobilising. What community are you from? What are you doing in the community to serve the people around you? We really need to mobilise there, because I think it's a two-party nightmare, and we have to move away from this. It's all about breaking this two-party duopoly now and moving towards a new independent politics, a politics that is about us and not about these career politicians.
And then the question next to you.
What is your dream for a peace in Gaza and a peace in the Middle East, and what can individuals do to achieve that?
Thank you so much for your question. That's a very important question. And I think, my dream, to put it in very simple words, is for us to have basic human rights. And I've always said this ever since I was young. And I think, the only way that can be achieved is by addressing the root causes. Because we all know history did not begin 16 months ago. And I've demonstrated this through the experience of my family being exiled in 1948. And so what we really need now is accountability. We need political will. It's clearly been shown over the past 16 months that this will not be a military solution. And a ceasefire will not end this either. Because remember that this is not the first time Gaza was attacked, and this isn't the first ceasefire either. So what we really need is an urgent demand to end this accountability, to end this genocide. And what we really, really need is the UK to play its role. Because remember, the UK bears responsibility for the situation we are in now. And this stems back to the Balfour Declaration. So what we've seen over the past 16 months is the UK, rather than upholding international law and defending universal principles, they have been giving diplomatic and military support to Israel. And this has to come to an end. And so one of the main things we should be pushing for is an end to selling arms sales to Israel. That has to come to an end. We have to put pressure on our government. If you're someone who wants to do more for Palestine, then these protests that are happening are really, really important. And they've been taking place, I'd say, monthly over the past 16 months. They have put pressure on our government, believe me. It's also about mobilising wherever you are. In your universities, in your workplaces. There's been workplace days of actions. It's about putting pressure everywhere and holding people accountable. And for a lasting peace to be achieved, root causes have to be addressed. That is ending the occupation. That is lifting the siege on Gaza. That is allowing Palestinian refugees to return home. And only through that can there be peace.
Thank you for that. Sort of on the topic of the UK government, since the election of Donald Trump, a lot of the threats made towards Palestinians by the US government and the Israeli government have sort of escalated. Trump has endorsed, forms of direct ethnic cleansing and pushed for the US to take military control of Gaza. So I wanted to ask, do you think there's a point at which the international community, the British government, the sort of rules-based international order will have to step in? And, do you think that that point is going to come anytime soon?
I'd be surprised if they did step in, because it's Donald Trump. But, as I said, the Palestinian people are not going anywhere. This is not new. These plans are not new. People have tried. We've seen 76 years of exile, of ethnic cleansing, decades of oppression, and 16 months of a genocidal onslaught on the Palestinian people. They've done everything they can to wipe us out, to erase us as a people, and they have failed. And the reality is they will continue to fail, whether it's Trump, Starmer, whoever else, Nigel Farage, they will continue to fail. And that's the reality. Palestinian people are rooted in Gaza. Palestinian people are rooted in the West Bank. Palestinian people are rooted in Haifa, in all of Palestine, right? And it's their rightful land. It's their homeland. They are not going to go anywhere.
And so the final two questions I have for today are sort of very much based around the internet and the idea of sort of online, both community organizing and resistance. So the first question I wanted to ask is sort of, you mentioned this in your speech, but, with the rise of the internet, with social media, with things like Instagram and TikTok, there's been a lot of footage coming out directly from Gaza of Palestinians resisting occupation and genocide. And my question is, how do you think this has sort of influenced and pushed activists across the globe to do more for Palestinians?
I think we can all agree the impact of social media for our cause has been monumental. And without it, I almost think, how would people be seeing this, right? Because there are no Western journalists who were allowed into Gaza during the genocide. And we've only been seeing it through the people in Gaza who've been uploading it on TikTok, on Instagram. We've been sharing it directly from them. We've been listening to their stories. We've been sharing their days with them, essentially. It's become like a diary. Every day you'd wake up and you'd see, okay, what has Bissen posted today? What has Martez posted today? What has Plistia posted? What's happening with them? It's almost like a connection that we've made with these journalists in Gaza. And without it, I'm very fearful, what could have happened without this, because we saw what happened in 1948. This time round, this has all been documented, live streams. The evidence is there. But again, we know it's not about evidence. We know it's about they don't see us as human beings. But regardless, this evidence will be there for many years to come. Social media-wise, many people have shared it. It has educated many people around the world. People who knew nothing about Palestine know so much now. And there is no one, especially young people, there is no one who can say, I didn't know. Rather, you'll be asked in the future, what did you do during this genocide? And what was your role that you played?
Exactly. Wonderful. And then I sort of wanted to ask, you have a large social media presence online. The internet has known your face for many years. Of course, as you mentioned during the speech, that attention has not always been positive. And so I wanted to ask, how do you deal with those sorts of levels of online hate for, who you are and for what you stand for? Yeah,
it's really difficult. And I think during this election, it was awful. I don't know if many of you saw my comments under all my Twitter posts and Instagram. It was absolutely awful. My friends would tell me, Leanne, don't look at the comments at all because you're getting carried away, focus on the campaign. And I even had my teacher actually message me, and he was like, Leanne, I'm so worried for you. I'm seeing all the hate on your Twitter, and I'm worried for your safety. And I think for me, I was lucky because in a way, I dealt with this at a very young age. I was exposed to this at the age of 15. And so I guess, it didn't affect me as much as it would had it been the first time. Because from a very young age, I knew that, okay, this is the reaction, it's always going to be like this. And it never stopped. Ever since I was 15, no matter what I do, no matter what post that I would put out, there would always be Islamophobic abuse, there would be just very awful, disgusting comments. And I knew that they would always be there. You just have to overcome it. This is just a distraction. And many of these keyboard warriors, there would be nowhere to be seen in person, right? They'd just be online. And I think about it, I'm like, okay, let them do whatever they want. Let them enjoy their time. Let them waste their time on my accounts, typing whatever they want. But it's not going to affect me because I have a bigger role to play here and I will not be distracted. And so, yeah, it's again, weapons of intimidation. This is their weapon of fear. These bots that they pay to do all of this under our posts. But it's about us not being distracted and staying true to our cause. And for me, it was about the campaign. And that's what I stayed focused on.
Absolutely. I want to make a final call for any questions from the audience, if anyone has anything to ask Leanne. Yeah, just over there.
Last general election was like my first time I was able to vote. And I'm so grateful that it was because of people like you. I'm in your neighbouring constituency, Woodford and Chingford Green. And because of that, I don't know, it was just really inspiring to see so many faces that look like me, like you, Faiza Shaheen, and so many other people. I just wanted to ask, you spoke a lot about going into places where people like you really aren't represented. So because you've inspired like a whole new generation, did you have any role models when you were going into this space?
That's a very good question. And firstly, it's great to meet you and Faiza as well, who ran as an independent. You know, I'm glad you had the opportunity to vote for her, because unfortunately many people didn't have the chance to vote for an independent. And by the way, we'll be doing a joint event on Monday. I don't know if you saw it online, but so I'll be in Woodford on Monday. But your question is, yeah, role models. This is a difficult question because, you know, for me, I'm not going to say anyone famous, but rather it was actually my mother, just because of, you know, being in this new country, doing everything by herself, being so independent, strong-minded, and just didn't allow anything to affect her, essentially no fear to derail her from anything, and just, you know, kept on going, because essentially we have no choice but to keep on going. And coming from these backgrounds, again, like, things don't get handed to you on a plate. You have to work hard towards them. And so seeing my mother go through that, with no one, having no family in this country, no one to help her, just, I think it gave me a lot of strength. And again, as I said in my speech, my parents taught me to have this courage, to stand up for what's right, even when I'm the only one standing. And so credits go back to my family, my parents, my mother.
That's wonderful. Are there any more audience questions?
Thank you for your sort of speech and joining us at the Union today. I wanted to ask you more about sort of America's involvement in sort of Middle Eastern politics. In particular, can we sort of move towards peace in the Middle East without America essentially sort of funding things and sort of being, I guess, an adversary in that sense?
I wish we could, because it would be so much easier, but unfortunately not. Unfortunately, we know the role that the UK plays, the US and Europe. And so right now, I mean, we've seen what Donald Trump has been saying. We would love, you know, if the US wasn't involved in any of this, things would be so much easier for us, believe me. Palestine would be freer very, very soon. But with the role that the US is playing, interfering in our lives, essentially, I think it's awful. And the whole idea of building a holiday resort as well, it's just, you know, who gave you the right to do that, is what we would say as Palestinians. This is our land. And again, this is what we're seeing is colonization, ongoing in this modern day. So with the US, no, I think there can be no peace. As long as the US continues to interfere, there can be no peace at all. This is another root cause that needs to be sorted.
Thank you. And any more questions? All right. Well, I guess I'll turn to my last question for the evening. It's a question that we ask every speaker who comes into the building, which is, what's next?
Very good question. I was asked this a lot after the election, and my main answer to this was that the election was over, but the injustices are continuing, and I can say that again today here, because we know that a ceasefire has taken place. The ceasefire has already been violated in Gaza many times. Palestine is not yet free. This wasn't just about Gaza. It's also about the West Bank. It's about Haifa, Yafa. It's about the whole of Palestine, right? And, you know, as someone whose family still lives in a refugee camp in Lebanon, I know that there is so much more work to be done for my people. And so I hope to continue in the fight for human rights in whatever capacity that I can. I'm now working in human rights policy, which I hope to continue. And I'm just very hopeful for the future in terms of the political state, because I think we have taught people so many lessons through this previous election. I hope we build on all the lessons that we've learned. I hope that this independent movement continues, and I'm really excited to see where it goes in 2029.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for that, and thank you for joining us here at the Cambridge Union.
Thank you very much.
If we could give a warm round of applause to Leanne. As always, we have a few announcements ahead of us for the next week of events here at the Cambridge Union. On Tuesday and Wednesday, we'll be welcoming Vince Cable and Martin Wolf to the Union, followed by a debate on Thursday. The motion before the House Thursday evening will be "This House believes policing cannot work." So please do be sure to join us here in the Union for what will be a fantastic week of events next week and going forward. Thank you again for joining us here today, and have an amazing evening.